probably look really bad this morning. I have no makeup on, didn't do my hair. I'm still in my pajamas, but that's what happens on Thanksgiving morning. You gotta get it done, so you get started right away, and you don't have time to get dressed until the very last minute. Mom life.
What we do here is go back.
Good morning and happy Thanksgiving. It's Jennifer from Laying Down Lambert's Icebox Throw. Technically not an icebox throw today because I am following an old recipe from my husband's grandmother, and it's oyster dressing. And you can even see the recipe is super handwritten on a piece of paper. I don't know, it could be 30 years old or more. And I'm gonna follow this recipe to a T because my father-in-law loves his oyster dressing at Thanksgiving, and he likes it just the way that his mom made it. So I'm following her recipe exactly. It is early in the morning, stayed up really late last night preparing everything. I chopped all of the vegetables that were needed for this recipe and others last night. So in this bag here, I have all of the vegetables. It's 4 onions, 2 bunches of green onions, half a bunch of celery. Over here I have a half a bunch of parsley. Over here I have half a head of garlic. So everything is chopped and ready to go. The first thing I need to do in this recipe, I did 2 days ago, was to prepare the oysters. So here's a quick shot of that. I had to first go through each oyster and feel around it to make sure there were no shells. So I did that, I drained the liquid, and now I'm ready to saute them. My father-in-law said to boil them, but according to the recipe that he gave me, passed down from his mother, it says saute. So I'm gonna follow her recipe and I'm going to saute the oysters. Now so normally when you would saute, you would have a little oil. Well, the problem is these oysters are really wet, so I'm a little nervous about just dumping this in here because of the oil. So I'm just gonna kind of slowly put them in there because they do have a little bit of oil just to coat the pans, but didn't want them to stick. This is a half a gallon of oysters. And you can get oysters here in New Orleans at any grocery store, or you can go to a seafood market and have them shucked and ready to go as well. So I'm gonna just dump these. Again, this recipe that I'm following from my father-in-law's mother says to saute the oysters until they curl. So I am gonna be sauteing them until they curl. So this is what the oysters look like after they have been basically boiling in their own water for a few minutes. You can see that the ends have curled, and that's what we were looking for, to know that they are ready to be cooled and cut into pieces. You want to save this liquid because you're going to soak the stale bread in it later. So here we have the oysters that are cooked on this side, and this is the leftover saved oyster water. The oysters have been drained yet again into this strainer, so I'm going to use those in a little bit, but I'm letting all the excess juice continue to come out of them. So I'm just setting these aside as we prepare the other parts of this recipe. My bread, I'm going to need a loaf of French bread, and it has to be stale. My father-in-law even brought me stale bread because he wanted to make sure that I used stale bread and not fresh bread. It is a whole loaf, we just kind of broke it apart. And I'm going to cube this in a little bit, but that's another step. The first step today is going to be to saute all of my vegetables. So join me over there. So into the pan we have 4 onions, 1 chopped bell pepper, 2 little bunches of green onions, half a bunch of celery, and I measured it. Like if it's a half a bunch, I put half a bunch. Exact measurements here. So we're gonna let this saute, and a lot of times they say till it's translucent or till it's soft, but I'm gonna let this sit and cook down for a little bit. It looks like a lot of vegetable mix. It's what the recipe called for. That's what I'm doing. So while this cooks over here, we're gonna turn back around and get to another step. My vegetables are sauteing and I'm gonna move on to the next step. Normally I'd have it in my head. Here's what I'm gonna do. Nope, we are following this recipe. The next step says, soak the stale bread in oyster water from the sauteed oysters. So 2 days ago when I was preparing the oysters, it said that after you cooked the oysters down, you cooked them not very long, just until their edges curled, and I'll kind of show you what one of them looked like. Their edges curled up, and that's how you knew it was ready. And then you save all the water. The recipe said to saute, and this is what happened. When I sauteed those raw oysters, all of this water came out from the inside of them. I didn't have to add any water to it. I actually drained the oyster water that it came in, rinsed it to get all the impurities off. I actually had to feel each oyster to check for any loose shells. It was a lot of work. Now it's time to soak the bread. So I'm gonna take my oyster liquid from the other day and pour it into a bowl. And we're going to soak the bread. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and cube this bread. I'm gonna cube it not that big, not as small as like stovetop stuffing cubes, but I am gonna try to cube it a little bit so that it can soak. It's just gonna get all mushy anyway once it's been soaking. So I don't want to waste too much time cubing it, but I do need to get it in some smaller pieces in order for it to fit in this bowl and then just to be manageable later. Again, Grandma, Maw Maw didn't tell me what to do about the cube bread, so this is the part I'm having to adapt to. There's also one other part I'm having to adapt to that I'm just realizing. In her recipe it says half-gallon oysters, 4 onions, 2 bunches of green onions, and then it says 4 onions again. I know it wasn't 8 onions because 4 onions was already like a lot of onions. So she might have just wrote it twice. I don't know. I would consult the expert, Ched's dad, but he's going to come up with something else for me to worry about doing wrong. So I'm just going to go with what I'm doing. So traditional stuffings, I find, have a lot of bread, sometimes even dry with bread. I have made an oyster dressing in the past, and it was more bread, less oysters, and it was delicious. But my father-in-law likes his to have more oysters, less bread. However, this looks like a lot of bread. But again, once you start soaking it in this water, it is going to mush up, and it's not going to look like that much. So the oyster dressing that we eat here in the South, and I'm going to say a South thing because I've looked up many oyster dressings, comparing it to this one, and I feel like a lot of the other recipes I've seen out there, some of the differences are the bread, the amount of bread. Some of the differences are the amount of oysters. This was a half-gallon oysters. Some recipes called for 1/4 of a cup of oysters. That'd be like 10 oysters. Some recipes even called for a can of oysters. Now, I would never dare use a can of oysters when we have fresh oysters readily available for us. But if you don't, then I guess that's another option as well. I wouldn't even know where to get that. Okay, so I feel like I need to start mixing this up because I'm not, it's already getting a little soggy. I don't know how this is gonna work. Her recipe actually says a loaf of bread, maybe even a little more. Well, there is no little more for us. This is it. I got 1 stale loaf, and whatever is in here is gonna have to work. So happy chopping. My vegetables have been cooked down in a stick of butter, and I'm gonna let them go for a little bit more, continuing to stir them, but they're about ready for the next step. All right, so we're gonna let the bread in the oyster water just soak on up while I get the rest of the things together. So what I think I need to do is I need to get a big bowl or a big pot to be able to mix it all together, because that's the next step. It says just to mix it all together. Mix the seasonings, which is what we consider all those vegetables, and the bread, and the oysters. Now, right now the oysters are whole, and the recipe doesn't say anything about chopping the oysters. So my father-in-law said you can cut them in half or cut them into thirds. You still want chunks, but you don't want it to be minced. You want to be able to feel and see the oysters in your dressing. So I'm going to use my kitchen scissors to cut these oysters. I'm not used to following a recipe to the T like this. I'm used to like varying it in the way that I want to vary it. So I'm just going to cut these in half because some of these are really small. So to the pan of sauteed vegetables, I added the garlic, the parsley, the thyme, and the Worcestershire sauce. And I'm just going to cook that down for a little bit before we start mixing all parts together. This is the casserole dish that I'm going to put it all in. It's 9 by 13. And I'm going to put a little oil just to grease the bottom of it, hoping that it doesn't stick or burn too much. My stepmother-in-law told me to make sure that you squeeze all the extra liquid out, because if you don't, then it's going to be super liquidy in your dressing. This is looking good. I'm going to show you a picture. It used to be this big cubed stale French bread, and now it's piecey and looking like what I would think a stuffing should look like. So I'm really super excited about that. All right, my sauteed vegetables back here are done. I'm going to turn that off. This is beautiful. Now this is beautiful. And really it just says to mix it all together. So I'm going to go ahead and just lay this in the pan because I'm going to use this pan to mix it. So we have the vegetables. I'm going to put the oysters in. There's no mention in the recipe about seasoning anything with actual, it's good though. I'm scared to put too much seasoning because I don't want to over salt anything. But I am going to add a little bit, just a tiny bit to it, a tiny bit to the breadcrumbs. And then if you need more, we'll add it later, I guess. So I'm just going to give this a mix. And then the final thing will be to add the breadcrumbs. So I'm just putting a paper towel, and I'm trying to get some of that extra liquid out. And I'm going to squeeze some more. Wow, that's a lot of water coming out. I just hope that I'm not squeezing too much because it doesn't say anything about that, because I don't want it to be dry. It feels really nice and moist. I'm not sure how much more liquid is going to come out. I am going to save this oyster liquid just in case throughout the cooking I notice it's drying up too much. I can always go back and scoop a little bit on top of it if it looks like it's drying out. Today you got to see us make a 50-year-old family recipe of oyster dressing. If you can't make it for Thanksgiving this year, try it out for Christmas. It works well then too. Everybody say Happy Thanksgiving! Happy Thanksgiving! We're still at our jammies. It's early. Give me a kiss. Love you.
What we do here is go back.
Oh.